Storytime about the nightmare customer that tried to build their own off-menu pasta dish. Being a picky eater is fine, but at the minimum, you have to work within the confines of what's actually available. Enter one stubborn asshole who took the menu items not as a suggestion, but as a point of negotiation. And it went like this. I'm looking at pastas. Do you have any rotini? No, just spaghetti, rigatoni, fettuccine, penne, and bow tie pasta. That page has all the available pasta dishes we serve. Well, you should carry rotini, but I'll start with a fettuccine base, and I like to add bolognese, mushrooms, basil, bell pepper. I'm sorry to cut you off, sir, but we don't offer build your own pastas. We only offer what's listed on the menu, and I can make a couple of modifications. Well, that's ridiculous. If you have the items, you should be able to make it. It's restaurant policy. It helps the kitchen flow. He stares angrily at me. Well, then I'm gonna need a minute. No problem, bud. I hadn't even asked if your table was ready to order before you started firing away anyway. I talked to the kitchen manager to give him a heads up, and he doubles down on not allowing grand modifications. I return after a few, and this guy's body language tells me that he's already prepared an opening statement for a courtroom. Okay, so I'm gonna start with the chicken Alfredo, but instead of the cream sauce, I want bolognese, no tomatoes, I want extra mushrooms, add basil, bell peppers, no Parmigiano, and instead of chicken, I want fresh cod. I replied, sir, I can only do a couple substitutions and our fresh cod is a separate dish entirely. Look, please talk to your kitchen, it's what I want. This guy seemed like he was trying to really impress his friends, who all looked pretty mortified. I found the kitchen manager again. He shakes his head and goes, alright, we'll bring in both pasta bolognese and a fresh fish of the day. $42 pasta. Bravo, buddy. The table gets their food, and this guy flashes me the most idiotic smirk like he just got one over on us. See, that wasn't so hard. And by the way, it's delicious. You should think about adding it to your menu. This self-satisfied piece of work. They finally get the bill, and this dude's face is priceless. Well, there definitely was a price to his expression, about $42. He goes, did you really charge me for 2 entrees? I said, yes, I told you the cod was a separate dish. He didn't have much room to argue there. Thankfully, his friend paid and left a fat tip, probably out of vicarious embarrassment.
Storytime about how 2 men tried to kidnap me after work. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I sent me on Instagram. I just turned 19 years old and I've been working at a coffee shop for 6 months. Unfortunately, sometimes I have to close the coffee shop all by myself, but it didn't really ever bother me until now. My parents, on the other hand, really don't like for me to close the coffee shop by myself, which of course makes total sense. At first I thought they were just overreacting, but they weren't. My parents would usually pick me up after my closing shift, but they would always arrive 15 minutes before I actually had to lock up just to make sure that I got out safely. 2 weeks ago, my dad had to go on a business trip, so my mom was the one that was going to have to go pick me up by herself. A few hours before closing time, my mom texted me saying that unfortunately the car wasn't turning on. She told me that she would call AAA, but I told her not to worry and that I would just get an Uber home. She kept fighting me on it, but I managed to convince her to just stay home. I kept my mom in the loop the entire night about the closing shift, and finally I called my Uber. The Uber was 10 minutes away, so I just waited inside until I saw them pull up. As I was gathering my things and putting on a jacket, I hear a knock at the door. When I turn around to look, it's a guy in a suit. He begs for me to let him in so that he could get a coffee. I apologized and said that we were closed for the night, but that he could come back in the morning. Then he started begging more and more. I actually felt really bad for him because he looked like he was freezing, so I decided to open the door and let him in quickly. He ordered an espresso and I quickly made it. I handed it to him, he paid really quickly and told me he was on his way out. Suddenly, another guy walks in through the door because I forgot to lock it behind me. And when the other guy walks in, the first guy told him to go straight to the cash register. Instantly, I knew that I was being robbed. But the guy with the suit was definitely the mastermind behind everything. He told me to sit down and that as long as I didn't do anything, he wouldn't hurt me. But I remembered I had the Uber still on the way. But it's not like I could pull out my phone to check if it was near. There was a panic button underneath the counter under the register, but I was sitting 2 tables away from it. Suddenly, I feel something in the back of my neck. The guy that had just been at the cash register comes up behind me and starts blowing on my neck. He started saying how pretty I was and that I looked way better in person than in picture. The guy in the suit chuckled and said, yeah, she is pretty in person. Suddenly, he grabs me by my arm and tells me that I'm leaving with them. I begged and begged for them not to. That's when I remembered my dad gave me a tip in case someone was ever trying to pick me up. I threw myself to the ground and acted as dead weight. It made it really hard for the one guy to pick me up. Luckily, I could reach over and hold onto a pole that was right near the register, and I held onto it as tight as I could. We struggled for about 30 seconds. Suddenly, the other guy comes in front of me, bites my hands down so that I could let go of the pole. Instead, I kept holding on tight. Out of nowhere, my phone starts to ring and I realize it's probably the Uber driver. I told the guys that my Uber driver was waiting for me outside and that they would get caught. The Uber driver must have seen what was happening inside because he started beeping really loud. The guy in the suit puts me in a chokehold and I begin to pass out. The man in the suit had me in a chokehold, but I could hear the Uber driver beeping as loud as he could outside. He had already seen what was happening to me and probably already called the cops. The man in the suit dragged my body towards the back exit. His partner had already left. This is when I saw my opportunity. I knew where all the pans and pots and knives were. I reached for a pot and I hit him as hard as I could. But unlike how it happens in the movies, he did not pass out. Instead, this made him angrier, but it gave me a second to run towards the front of the store. As soon as I did that, I could hear the police sirens pulling up toward the front of the store. This made the man in the suit back away from me. I ran to the cops and I was safe. Unfortunately, the 2 men haven't been found. And I was interrogated for hours. My dad came home from the trip, but now I'm terrified that these guys know where I live. Also, what picture was he talking about? The police think that they had been stalking me for weeks, if not months. I'm terrified and I don't know what to do. Help.
So my mother-in-law was poisoning me, and I found out why. Everyone has their own nightmare-in-law story, though I couldn't imagine how bad mine would be. As it turns out, the worst thing wasn't my mother-in-law poisoning me, the worst thing was why she did it. I met Craig on one of my rare vacations, and we had a sort of whirlwind relationship. We fell hard for each other, and we were married at a courthouse wedding within 2 months without ever meeting each other's families. Mine visited a few weeks later, and after the initial shock, they really liked Craig. While we moved in together and figured out married life, I got to hear more about his parents who live near the rest of his extended family a few hours away, though we never saw them. My work schedule is rough. I work 6 to 7 days a week, and my off times are a blur of appointments and errands. I think in the 2 years before I met Craig, I only left the city once. I finally got a few days off so we could visit his family about 6 months later. His whole family came over, and everyone seemed thrilled to meet me except for his mom, Betsy. She was cold and distant and could sit there without saying a single word to me. It was creepy, but I kept trying to spark up a conversation. On our last day, he announced we should take an afternoon hike into the national park their house sat on the edge of. Betsy made lunch, and I was changing to go out when it hit me, just waves of nausea. I wound up in the bathroom for hours that afternoon. I figured it was just a touch of something and thought nothing of it. We went back a few months later and again thought nothing of it and had a great time except for Betsy. She wouldn't talk to me, though Craig brushed it off and said she was just getting to know me. He finally said we could rent jet skis the next day and said that we could explore the lake in the next town as a way to get out of the house and unwind, which made me feel better. I was so excited to tell everyone where we were going, but it wasn't to be. After eating, I got so sick I could barely walk for the next 2 days. At this point, I started to get suspicious. No one else was sick, and we all ate the same food. It seemed like Betsy may have been up to something, but it wasn't until our next visit when a night in a romantic cottage another hour up the road was canceled due to me getting sick that I was sure. Betsy had to be poisoned. Craig said I was insane. He said it must be an allergy to something his mom was using in her cooking, which actually made sense, though I never had time for an appointment to get it checked out. So I decided on the next trip that I'd make a big casserole and bring it with us. If I cooked the food and served it, nothing could be added. Well, I hadn't had 2 bites before I realized I had left the wine I was drinking unattended while I was heating up the casserole. My stomach was already doing flips, and you know what happened next, and it was not pretty. I was so sure his mom was poisoning me that I confronted Craig about it. I told him that I wouldn't visit his family again if she was there. It was our first big fight, and he finally said he wouldn't force me to visit, and we could figure out how to best deal with the situation. She had never been nice to me, so it wasn't a loss. The next time I got off, we decided to head to that little cottage we had rented before and not been able to use. We were driving past his family's place, and it seemed rude not to stop, so we compromised and brought some pizzas. I even decided to not drink anything unless it was water from the tap. We got in and threw pizza on our plates when one of his cousins arrived, and everyone briefly left the food unattended. I realized almost immediately, and we decided to try an experiment. Craig and I both had 2 slices, so we switched our plates while everyone was in the next room. Craig got so sick, I was really worried about him. The drive back to the city was awful, and we had to pull over a lot. He was a mess. We had been back home for 3 days before I broke down and told him that I'd switched the plates. I've never seen such anger before. The rage in his eyes is something that I'll remember for the rest of my life. He shoved me into the wall and then came flying at me. He threw me on the couch, but I somehow managed to grab my keys and phone and run out the door, not even wearing shoes. I luckily got to the elevator and made it to a friend's place safely, finally turning off my phone after I missed his 47th call. I had no idea what to do or when it would be safe to go home. It was the scariest time of my life. It was 2 days before I turned my phone back on when I heard a message from the police, and I drove upstate immediately. Craig was dead. Betsy had shot him after he broke into her house and charged her with a knife. I learned that Craig had been married once before, and his wife had died in a tragic hiking. Craig had made a lot of money in the life insurance payout, and Betsy always suspected Craig had killed her and was nervous about letting me be alone with him, especially out in the remote area he was so familiar with from his childhood. So she ensured that every time he planned an outing that I would be sick. It wasn't easy, but she didn't think that I would believe her, as no one else had ever shared her suspicion about Craig. I found the life insurance policies he took out on me without my knowledge afterwards, and refused to press charges against Betsy since she was only trying to protect me. I still visit her from time to time when I need to get out of the city, and I love her cooking.
Storytime about how I caught my husband cheating on me with a neighbor. My husband is a really rich guy. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I first met my husband when I was 20 years old and he was 10 years older than me. He was basically my sugar daddy. Once I graduated college, he asked me to work at his company. I did all of the marketing. But eventually we wanted to have kids, so we decided to move to a bigger house. We ended up moving to a really secluded neighborhood with lots of rich families. One of our neighbors owned a yoga studio. There was also a young couple living across the street from us, and they were also business owners. It was the perfect situation until I noticed that my husband was paying less and less attention to me. Well, I didn't hesitate to ask him why. He denied it and said that I was making things up in my head. So I installed an app in his phone that would send all of his text messages and emails straight to my phone. And guess what I saw? Text messages between him and the neighbor who owned the yoga studio. She was 10 years older than my husband, so I never saw it coming. I started collecting all the evidence into folders, pictures, and text messages. I wanted to catch him in the act. So one day I said I was going to a spa for the entire day. Part 2 is I told my husband I was going to be at the spa all day long. I wanted to see if he was going to bring the neighbor around to cheat on me some more. When I got in the car to leave, I get a message that he sent to the neighbor. Like I said, I had planted an app in his phone, so I was receiving all the messages he was sending and receiving. And of course, he sends her a message saying, hey, my wife's going to be at the spa all day. We're free. And she replies saying, perfect, I'll come over. My stomach dropped. I drove around for a bit and waited for her to get to my house. Then I see she sends him a message saying she's there. That was my cue to go back to my house to catch him in the act. I race back and enter the house super quietly. I go into the living room and don't see anything, so I assumed they were in our bedroom. I go up to the bedroom and no one's there. And I see they're in the backyard in the pool. I pull out my phone and press record. I run downstairs and I surprise them in the act. They were both naked and my husband jumps out of the pool and wraps himself in a towel. Our neighbor stays in the pool. My husband says, I was gonna tell you, I swear. It gets worse. Part 3 is up. I catch my husband doing dirty things in the pool with our neighbor. I'm recording all of this, by the way. He says he was gonna tell me. So I show him all the evidence that I had been gathering. All the messages and the pictures. But little did he know I had already hired a lawyer. I'd known about the affair for about a month at this point. I had already been working on the divorce with the lawyer, documenting every single transgression my husband committed against me with our neighbor. And when I told my husband, he freaked. The neighbor, aka the woman my husband was with, she got out of the pool and went home. I printed out some flyers with all the pictures she had sent my husband and spread them around her yoga studio. I now get $10,000 from my husband monthly. My best friend's boyfriend starts DMing me on Instagram. He confesses that he had a crush on me when we were in college together, and I told him that I did too. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. From that day on, he would DM me every single day and we would just flirt back and forth. I started feeling really guilty and I told him one day I can't do this anymore. That's when he told me he also felt guilty and that the best thing was for us to stop talking, so we did. I was so sad. A few weeks passed by and my best friend asked me if she could have the apartment all to herself because she's planning a romantic dinner for him. I said yes, but I felt so jealous. I left the apartment because I realized that I was so in love with him. I went to the supermarket and ate a whole pack of Oreo cookies and went to the movies. I get a text message from my best friend asking me to come home immediately. My stomach sank and I thought she had found out. When I get there, she's crying and she says that he broke up with her. I asked if he said why and she said because he was in love with another woman. My stomach sank again. I was there with her the entire night while she cried, knowing her boyfriend left her because of me. Part 3 is up. My best friend's boyfriend had broken up with her because of me. I didn't have the heart to tell her. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. A few days later, she started going out on Tinder dates again. I could see that she was feeling better, so I decided to confess to her everything. And she told me she could tell that he and I liked each other. Then she told me I should date him. Well, I didn't waste any time. I sent him a text message and asked him if he wanted to meet up for dinner. And when we did, he asked me to be his girlfriend. We dated for 6 months before he proposed. He even got my name tattooed on his neck. The only problem is that my mom thinks he might do the same thing to me. I don't even want to think about that because I truly believe that he loves me. But let's hope not. I've been planning the wedding and I asked my best friend to come. Of course she said yes. She's super happy for me. And she actually has a boyfriend now. Do you guys think my fiance will end up doing the same thing too?
Crazy story time about the girl that my dad was having an affair with. So a little background information. My mom and my dad had been married for 10 years. And they had 3 children. Me, who's the oldest, I'm 16. And then my 2 younger sisters. Well, since I was 12 years old, I've lived with my grandma. Because of some personal issues that went on at home. Well, because I lived with my grandma, I barely ever saw my family. Because she lived like an hour away. So I was never in any family photos or anything like that. Well, when I was 15, my dad started coming to my grandma's every Friday and taking me out for pizza. And I thought it was because he just wanted to spend time with me. Well, a few months after he started taking me out for pizza every Friday, I found it really odd that he was getting a hotel for the whole weekend and only seeing me on Fridays. So I had talked to my grandma about it. So my grandma told me that he was having an affair. And she said that she didn't care because she absolutely despised my mom. I didn't tell my dad that I knew because I just thought that it would cause issues between us. Well, the next Friday he came up and we went to the pizza place like for part 2.
Part 2. So, like I said, I saw this name on his phone, and there was something special about this name. So, whenever I kept streaks, I would put the word streak, and then an emoji, and then the person's name. And he got the idea that instead of keeping her name, he would put it as streak. So I was like, that's really fucking weird. And at first I was like, what the fuck? So I opened his phone, and what do you know? It's from that girl. And she was replying back to a big paragraph that he sent her. And we had school that same day. So at 6:30 in the morning, this girl got a big paragraph from my boyfriend about how she's such a beautiful, amazing girl and that she deserves somebody who's going to take her out and buy her flowers and stuff. And how if she wanted to go out to dinner, let him know. He took an extremely long time in the bathroom, so the waiter came to our table. So I ordered $300 worth of food for myself. So when he came back, I told him that I had to go call my mom and I left.
Part 3 about the crazy ass girl that my dad was having an affair with. So like I said, she comes over, she sits down. She thinks she's confronting me about being just some random girl that my dad's cheating on her with. And then, like I had said earlier, I was not in any family photos because I had lived with my grandma for years. So she was like, oh, like, no, he showed me pictures of his kids and stuff like that. But because she thought that I was lying, she went up and tried to fight me. But I grabbed this bitch by her hair and I fucking dragged her. And of course, while I'm beating the shit out of her, my dad walks in. It's like, oh my god, what are you doing to her? Let her go, blah, blah, blah. Everybody else is freaking out at this point. We get kicked out. The cops get called. She goes to jail because originally she put her hands on me. And I decided to press charges, even though my dad begged me not to. So then I confronted him about the fact that he only came up once a week to spend one Friday with me, but he got a hotel and spent the whole weekend with her. So now I still live with my grandma. I don't see my dad anymore. He's still having an affair with this girl. I'm still really pissed off about it, so I kind of just want to tell my mom what he's doing.
Storytime on why my dad would never allow me and my sister inside of his basement. So growing up, my parents split and my sister and I would stay with my mom. During the summer, we'd go see our father. My dad was a mortician and he owned a funeral home. When he would do his work, he'd go to his basement and tell us to never go inside of it. At night, he liked his basement. I always assumed that he didn't want us going down there in fear of us seeing dead bodies. One night, me and my sister was up. We couldn't sleep, so we started playing Truth or Dare. And my little sister dared me to go inside the basement. I didn't want to be a punk, so I did the dare, and I found the key to go to the basement. Before I get down there, I of course expected to see bodies, but when I was walking around, I didn't see any. But what was crazy was that it sounded like there were little girls crying. This is part 2 of why I
got lost in a haunted maze. Like I said, I lost track of my friends and I was looking for my friends and I ended up in a part of the maze where there was all these guys that I didn't even see at first. All I know is I turned around and I got grabbed. So I screamed.
So I went back upstairs and told my sister that there was nothing down there. She said that she wanted to see, so she came to the basement with me. When we were both walking around, she said that she heard the whimpering too. My sister had saw a door, and it sounded like the noise was coming from behind the door. When we opened it, we saw girls chained up.
Am I the asshole for telling my parents I would not take care of my obese brother? When my little brother Teddy was born, his umbilical cord was wrapped around his neck. According to my mom, he wasn't breathing for at least 3 minutes. Since then, my parents often used that as an excuse for Teddy's behavior. My childhood became a living hell with Teddy. Give Teddy your candy, he died coming into this world. Let him play with your friends, he died coming into this world. Let him open your presents. Teddy almost didn't have a birthday. I had to put up with Teddy's tantrums, abuse, fits, and bad behavior. If I touched a single hair on his head, I would be punished while Teddy got away with whatever he did. It became so bad that when I was 15, I moved out of the house to live with family members away from Teddy. My contact with my parents and Teddy is limited. Currently, I'm 35 and Teddy is 26. When he was 18, he decided he wanted to be a competitive eater, which turned out into just eating. Teddy now weighs almost 600 pounds. Because of his weight, he can't hold a job and lives with our parents who still cater to him and pay for everything. Since Teddy requires round-the-clock care, my parents hardly leave the house. They weren't present at my wedding, only see the grandkids if I bring them around, and all family events like dinners have to be held at their house because it's hard to move Teddy. A few days ago, Teddy suffered a bad fall that put him in the hospital. My husband and I at least came to see him. My parents complained that the hospital wasn't feeding him enough, didn't have a wheelchair big enough for him, and naturally they didn't want to hear anything about his weight. It would be easier to turn water into gold. To make a long story short, my parents pulled me and my husband aside and asked for a large amount of money for Teddy's care. They said that they didn't have the money to keep caring for him and were having to dip into their retirement funds. They even suggested that once Teddy's cleared to go home, he'll move in with us because me and my husband are well off with a bigger house. And so we can get a break because we take care of him all year round while you just visit. I said no. My husband told him hell no. We both work full time. Our kids are enrolled in sports and dance. We made it clear that Teddy will not be moving in with us, nor will be moving our schedule around to deal with him or giving them money even though we can afford it. He's your brother. You almost didn't have a brother. We left the hospital. My mom called me later, berating me, abandoning the family and Teddy and demanding money. I told her I would not take care of Teddy under any circumstances. Even if something happened to her and my dad, I would not take care of my brother. He's her problem, not mine. My mom cursed me out over the phone and hung up. I do feel a little bad because Teddy's my brother, but he made my life hell, and my parents refused to take any responsibility for his behavior. Am I the asshole?
Story time about how I broke the news to my very religious family that I was single and pregnant. My parents are very religious and super strict. I was never allowed to have boyfriends or even talk to boys or even have guy friends. My girlfriends only could come over to my house and I could never go over to friends' houses. I was never even allowed to go to parties. Anytime I needed to make a phone call, my parents would monitor the phone call, so there was absolutely no way I could get away with anything. And I never even lied to them. I got straight A's and graduated valedictorian from my high school. When I turned 18, I went to the university my parents wanted me to go to. My parents are very rich and have lots of money, so I knew that they would get me into whatever university they wanted me to go to. When I finally got accepted into university, I begged them to let me stay on campus, even though we're only a 2-hour drive away from the university. I wanted to have privacy, and of course, I wanted to feel like a grown-up. After months and months of convincing my parents, they finally said yes. They even got me a private dorm so that I wouldn't have to share my room with anyone. For the first time in my life, I had independence and I could make my own decisions. But still, all in all, I was a pretty good girl. I would go to class, go study at the library, and then go back to my dorm. I never went to any parties, but I did start making friends. One of these friends was a really wild girl. She was in my dorm building and she pretty much did everything I ever wanted to do. She was wild and crazy and I just wanted to be like her. She started inviting me to all these house parties and I didn't know how to say no. I went to one of them and I met this really cool guy. At least I thought he was cool at the time. We spoke all night and he tried to make me believe that he was this perfect little boy. And of course, I fell for it. After hanging out a few more times, we did the dirty. And then he ghosted me. This was the first time I had done anything like that and I was really heartbroken. I was convinced that this guy was gonna marry me. That's how naive I was. After the last time I'd seen him, I realized that I hadn't gotten my period. And when I checked my calendar, it had been 2 months since I got my last period. Now you may ask why I didn't notice this before. Pretty much because I was studying all the time. I never really gave myself any breaks and I was constantly reading books and doing homework. I basically lived in my books. When the realization of not having my period for 2 months came in, I was devastated and I knew that I was pregnant. I ran to the nearest drugstore and got a test. When I saw that it was positive, the first thing I did was call the boy. But like I said, he had ghosted me. But this time he did answer the phone because it had been a few months. I told him that the test was positive. He told me the baby wasn't his and then he hung up. Unfortunately for me, I had no idea where he lived. I decided to Google his name and apparently he didn't even go to the university that I was going to. He was just a friend of some guy that went there. Finally, Christmas break arrives. I was 4 weeks pregnant and I showed up to my parents' house. I was 4 weeks pregnant, the guy that got me pregnant had ghosted me, and I knew I had to go home for Christmas from university. I had thought of how I was going to tell my parents and I even wrote them a letter. I was simply going to hand my parents the letter as soon as I got home. But when I got there, they were so happy to see me. I hadn't been home for a few months and I could tell that they really missed me and I just didn't want to spoil the moment. So instead of telling them the first day, I waited until the second day. I came out from my bedroom and my mom asked me why I looked so pale. This is when I just said it. I'm pregnant. My mom instantly began to cry and asked me what happened. I could hear my dad coming down from the stairs. I turned around and said to him, I'm pregnant. When my dad saw my mom crying, he sat down on the couch and said nothing. And this was scarier than him yelling at me. My mom joined him on the couch and then I sat on the floor right next to them. That's when I just decided to tell them the truth. From beginning to end, I told them exactly what happened. Then my dad said, don't worry, we will help you. I could not believe it. And as soon as my dad said that, my mom stopped crying and said, yeah, he's right. We're your family and you don't need that guy. The only thing my dad asked from me was to stay in university. And I told him that there was no way I was going to let my education go to waste. I could tell my parents were really disappointed in me, but they didn't say anything. We had all our family coming over for Christmas dinner, and my dad announced it to everyone then. Instead of acting the way I thought he was going to act, he was almost happy. He wasn't angry, but he was disappointed, but he didn't hide it like a little dirty secret. My family congratulated me, and they were all very happy. But of course, they started asking all these questions. When I told them that the father wouldn't be involved, they were really upset. Luckily, my aunt was dating a private investigator at the time. I gave her the baby daddy's number and name, and she gave it to her boyfriend. He came back with a bunch of information for me. Apparently, he was a dropout and didn't have a job, but he came from a very wealthy family. So my parents and I decided to get a lawyer and ask for child support. When I had the baby, my family was so happy. He is literally the light of our lives. He is so loved by his grandparents, and I'm so grateful to my parents. We all live together, and my baby is 5 years old now. His grandpa and him are best friends, and they do everything together. Now, the baby daddy wants to be in my child's life, but I don't know if I should say yes or no. Up until last year, he didn't want anything to do with us. But now that he sees that the baby is older and he plays, he wants to be involved now. I don't know if I should say yes, but I also feel bad depriving my child of his father. Merry Christmas, and what should I do?
Alright, since y'all are asking, I'm going to give you the story time. So keep in mind, when I was in middle school, all 3 years, I went to an all-girls school, okay? So this story time happened when I was in the 8th grade. It was like towards the middle of the year. Okay, so this new girl had came to the school, right? And she was a big bitch. Like, she was hitting 6 feet. I'm not even kidding. Like, I'm not exaggerating. That bitch was tall as fuck. And she was pushing 200 pounds. So she was a big bitch compared to me. Like, I'm not body shaming or nothing, but me, I've been 5'3" since I was in the 6th grade. I've been no more than 100 pounds my entire life. So compared to her, I'm pretty fucking small. So she came to the school, like I'm saying, she was new. The girls that she, befriended, were the girls that did not like me. Ironic. So this bitch wanted to play follow the leader, and she started talking shit about me because these girls used to talk shit about me. And I heard that she was talking about me, so, you know, I just confronted her. I was pretty respectful, though. Like, I wasn't trying to, like, bully her or nothing. I was just like, why are you talking about me? Like, you don't know me. Just keep my name out of your mouth, and everything will be good, you know? And she's like, oh, no, it's a misunderstanding. Like, I wasn't talking about you, nothing like that. You know, and I confronted her when she was with a group of girls who did not like me, and none of them backed her up. None of them said nothing to her, okay? So I'm like, whatever. You know, time goes on. I still hear from people that she's talking bad about me. Well, I used to go to the Boys and Girls Club every day after school, and she ended up starting to go to the Boys and Girls Club. So when she went, like, I just, you know, confronted her again, and, like, she got kind of mouthy with me. So then I was like, come on, bitch, like, do you want to get it or no? And she was like, oh, you're irrelevant. I'm not trying to fight you, whatever. So we, like, got into it. We were about to fight, but, like, it broke up before anything could happen. That was that. Well, the very next day, I had one class with this bitch. I had science class, okay? And in this class, our science teacher in 8th grade was a bitch. Like, everybody was, like, very scared of her. I mean, I wasn't, but she was just super bitchy, and, like, that's why everybody was scared of her. But this day, our teacher wasn't there. We had a substitute. So you know how kids are when a substitute comes. They start acting out, doing shit that they know they're not supposed to. So this bitch got bold this day and started talking about me. So I turned around. I was like, bitch, you didn't want it yesterday at the Boys and Girls Club, so shut the fuck up because you don't want it today. Well, like, I turned around, you know, minding my business, kept doing my work, and she was still talking about me. And then, I don't know what the fuck, her friend must have spoke some boldness into her, because then this bitch threw a chair at the back of my head. And honestly, bitch, I blacked out. All I remember was jumping over the table, punching her in her throat, and yeah, when I came back to, there was 2 teachers pulling me off of her. She was covered in blood, and yeah, don't throw a chair at me, bitch.
Let me tell you about my day. It started this morning when I went to go sign the lease for my new affordable apartment. I show up to the building, I say, hi, I'm here for the lease signing. The front desk says, okay, let me call somebody. Then they call another person. Then they call the third person. You know when they have to call 3 people, something's wrong. Front desk says, just take a seat. 10 minutes later, the manager comes out, says the leasing agent isn't here today, so we had to call somebody from another building. They'll be here in 30 minutes. I say, that's fine, I've been waiting 5 years for this apartment. Leasing agent shows up, we go upstairs to the office, we can't get in. 10 minutes later, we get in. First thing the leasing agent says is, did you get an email last night with the lease? And did you sign it? I did, in fact, get an email last night with the 108-page lease. And after getting that email, I said to my mother, do you think I should sign this tonight? And she said, no, I think you should wait until tomorrow. So no, I did not sign the lease. I say to the agent, oh no, I was going to wait until today. Leasing agent says, oh, that's okay. I just don't know where the computer is in this office. 10 minutes later, a Dell laptop from 1999 has been located. An additional 10 minutes later, the Dell laptop is turned on. Agent says, okay, I just need you to sign into your email to access the lease link. You mean the email that's always logged in on my phone and my laptop so I don't know the password to it email? Reset my password. Log in, start signing the lease. 108 pages. Get to page 70, website stops working. Every other website is still working. Internet is still working. Try it on my phone, not working. Leasing agent calls customer service, no response. We finally get the website to work again, except not a single one of my signatures on any of those 70 pages has been saved. Start signing again. 1 hour and 13 minutes later, the lease is signed, the keys are in my hands. I say to the leasing agent, well, that was probably your longest lease signing ever. No response. And so now I am sitting in my new tub, fully clothed, there is no water in this tub, and I am simply reflecting.
To anyone who gets a period, this video is for us. When I was in middle school, I really appreciated this teacher who would let the girls go to the bathroom whenever we wanted. And the guys would complain that they had to wait 20 minutes at least after lunch so that they could use the restroom. And the teacher would always remind them, you guys are boys and these are young ladies and they don't always have to just relieve themselves in the restroom. And I didn't even realize that that was just basic human decency for people who have periods. Until I got to high school. When I was a junior in high school, I was sitting in class and I felt like I was bleeding. And so I told my teacher that I had to use the restroom. And he told me I couldn't go because it was the first 15 minutes of class. And I told him, it's an emergency. I really have to use the restroom. And he said, you should have thought about that at lunch. And because I'm not going to sit here and bleed, I wanted to respond to this comment because I've already gotten a few comments from cis men and cis women who keep putting only women and only girls get periods. And to that, I want to say, are you not a person? Why were you offended that I said people with periods? You're still counted. You're still a person. You're still included. This was just being more inclusive to people who do not identify as women and still get periods. There are so many beautiful people that do not identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. And it's important that they're still included in these spaces and conversations because these issues still affect them. So yeah, sorry to break it to you. Cis women aren't the only ones that get periods. We have trans men and many other people that do not identify with women and still get periods. I also saw a lot of follow-ups saying only women get this. All women get periods. This is a reminder that not all cis women get periods either. There's plenty of women with medical conditions that do not give them a period. And lastly, I know it was a strong video. It was made by a strong person, so thank you. If you went to a charter school, please stitch this with the most stupid rules your charter school had. I went to a charter school in grades 4th through 8th, so we had to wear uniforms. There were lots of rules. You were a scholar. And in one of the years, I think it was my 8th grade year, they passed a rule. The rule was you could not travel through the school in groups of 5 or more. So if you had a friend group of 6 people, you had to drop somebody. And this was not told to us through teachers. This was broadcasted on the announcements. The teachers didn't even know about it. So we were sitting in class and we got this announcement in the morning after the Pledge of Allegiance. And the teacher was dying. He was like, well, guys, looks like you have to drop your most least attractive friend now. Like, buddy, we already got our 5. You can't walk with us. Now someone's gonna ask, what would happen if you walked in groups with more than 5 people? Detention, anytime, detention. Just like that, someone had to go. Someone had to walk alone. And for what? Like, what was the point of that rule? What was the reason for that rule? Like, that was kind of fucking mean. Yeah, I can. So another rule is that the boots can only be ankle boots. You couldn't have any boots that were over your ankle. I came to school with boots that were 2 inches over my ankle and I got sent to the principal's office. The only thing was they pulled me out of testing for this. The security guard quietly followed me to my classroom, never told me that I needed to go to the office, waited till class started and I had begun a timed reading test for the state, then came into the classroom, pulled me out and made me go to the principal's office. And my teacher was like, she's taking a timed state test. And the security guard said, I don't care, she needs to come with me. They had really informed me that my boots were too big, so I folded them down because you can fold them down, but they had fur on them. And even though fur boots wasn't in the dress code, it violated the dress code. Because one of the rules in their dress code is subject to change at any time. And they decided now was the time. I go to the principal's office to wait for the principal. Turns out principal's in a meeting. They made me call my dad to bring me a change of shoes. My dad wakes up early to drive 3 kids to 3 different schools. He was pissed. He yelled at everybody. They never made me call him again. All for the principal to tell me it was okay. I could do this all day. Another stupid rule my charter school had was that if you had asthma, you couldn't keep your inhaler on you during PE. And guess who had asthma? Me. And this was so real. Like, they were like, if you're running a mile, you cannot keep your inhaler on you. Like, of all things that I have to do in PE, the mile is the one time I would like to have my inhaler on me. I guarantee you I'm not making it to the 3rd lap without it. And they were so serious. They're like, no, you can't have your inhaler on you. You can leave it up here. So if I'm running the mile and I have an asthma attack, am I supposed to crawl back to you? Because God knows I can't run back to you. Like, no, in total seriousness, how am I supposed to get back to you while having an asthma attack? I know how that's gonna go right now. I'm not gonna make it. And I made sure too, like, maybe this is just an issue with me holding it in my hands. Maybe you think I'm gonna lose it. Like, I'm gonna lose something that could save my life. Anyway, I was like, can I get a fanny pack? Can I wear a fanny pack while I'm running the laps? No, I could not. They want me just to rely on peer support. Like, coach, she's dying. I had to smuggle it in my bra, bruh. I hated charter school. This is another one about dress code BS at my charter school. I kid you not, they changed some things in the dress code specifically because I wore them. And you can't say, oh, it's probably not because just you wore it. No, it's very specific to me. I was the only kid at this charter school that would specifically pull up in suspenders, bow ties, and neckties. And they would always try to dress code me for it. And I'm like, it's not in the handbook. Like, it doesn't say I can't wear a bow tie. They said it was me mocking the dress code by dressing up to mock the code that was already set. Baby, it's 2012. I'm a hipster who was very closeted. I'm wearing a bow tie for me, baby. No, I got so much shit for doing this my first year that when I came back for my second year, all of these things were instated in the dress code. They removed all of it. They said, no, you can't wear this, you can't wear this, you can't wear suspenders. Who was I hurting?